Retribution always chooses a crisp, sunlit day for its arrival. The air conditioning inside JFK International Airport chilled me to the bone. I pulled my beige trench coat tighter around myself, my hands gripping a bouquet of sunflowers. Thaddeus Thorne once told me he loved their resilience, the way they relentlessly sought the light without ever bowing their heads. I imagined how his face would light up when he saw me, and a smile tugged at my lips. 5 years. From West Point to a grueling special operations deployment overseas. The moment he asked Serafina Vance stayed behind in New York for 5 years. I waited for him. I managed the toxic infighting of his ruthless relatives, catered to his mother's endless list of ailments and prescriptions, and pulled his family's floundering real estate empire, Thorne Development Group, out of the red time and time again. The entire Thorne family called me their golden goose. Wherever there was a fire, Serafina was there to put it out. But I knew I was doing it of my own free will because he had promised that when his tour was over, he would marry me. The PA system chimed. The flight from overseas had landed. I stood on my tiptoes, my heart drumming against my ribs. A sea of people flooded into the arrivals hall, exhausted travelers with oversized luggage, young mothers wrangling toddlers, businessmen in wrinkled suits. And then I saw Thaddeus. He had grown leaner, his skin weathered by the desert sun over those 5 years. But the coldness radiating from him, seemingly from his very marrow, had deepened. He wore a perfectly pressed dress uniform, stripped of identifying patches, yet he stood there like a blade, freshly drawn from battle, all sharp edges and steel. He saw me. He clearly froze for a fraction of a second. Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion I couldn't decipher. Just as I was about to take a step toward him, a tearful, ringing voice echoed from a side corridor. Thad. A young woman in a flowing white sundress, her long hair cascading like a butterfly's wings, darted out of the crowd. Right in front of everyone, she threw herself into Thaddeus's arms. Her hands locked around his waist in a death grip, her face buried in his chest, her slender shoulders trembling. Her voice wasn't loud, but every syllable hammered into my ears. Thad, you're finally back. I've waited 5 years for you. I thought about you every single day. Why did you take so long? Thaddeus's body visibly tensed. He looked down at the woman in his arms and spoke in a gravelly voice. Lorelei. How are you here, Lorelei? Mercer. I mentally repeated the name. The girl from his childhood neighborhood, the one who used to follow him around like a shadow crying Thaddy before her family relocated to Miami. The same Lorelei his mother constantly praised. Lorelei is such a sweet, pure-hearted girl. The very same girl in the only photograph in his old album he never let me touch, its corners worn soft from handling. How wonderful. Thaddeus raised his hand. I thought he was going to gently push her away, but instead his palm settled softly on her back as if soothing a frightened kitten. I stood paralyzed. The crowd surged around me. Someone bumped into my shoulder, muttering a hasty, "Excuse me," but I didn't flinch. A single yellow petal detached from my bouquet, twirling lightly before landing on the terrazzo floor. A passing sneaker crushed it into a yellow smear. Only then did Thaddeus snap his head up and look directly at me. His lips moved. I think he said my name. I smiled a light, weightless expression. It was the exact same smile Serafina Vance wore when signing hostile takeover contracts while being dragged through the mud in Manhattan boardrooms. What was this scene to me? I didn't approach them. I didn't demand answers. I didn't shed a tear. I casually tossed the bouquet of sunflowers into the nearest trash can, squared my shoulders, turned on my heel, and walked away. The sharp click-clack of my stilettos on the marble floor sounded like nails being driven into a coffin. Thaddeus's voice echoed behind me. He was calling out, "Sarah, wait." There was a raw panic in his tone, a sound I had never heard from him before, but I had no intention of waiting. 5 years was enough. I pushed through the airport's glass revolving doors, and the brisk autumn air slapped my face. I pulled out my phone, swiped the screen, and dialed an unsaved number. It rang twice before a gravelly seasoned voice answered, laced with surprise. "Miss Serafina?" I tilted my head up, staring directly at the glaring sun, and spoke in a voice as casual as if I were discussing the weather. "Caldwell, I need a favor. The Thorne Development Project in Brooklyn, they're waiting on a commercial loan from Chase Bank. Make a call to the right people. Stall the approval." A heavy silence hung on the line for 2 seconds. "Miss Serafina, are you certain? You've spent years paving the way for the Thorne family?" Paving the way, I scoffed. There was zero warmth in my eyes. "Caldwell, the daughters of the Vance family don't pave ways for anyone. I was digging their grave." I ended the call, yanked open the door of my SUV, and slid behind the wheel. The airport terminal shrank in my rearview mirror. A text notification popped up on my screen. It was Thaddeus. Sarah, where are you? Listen, I can explain. It's not what you think. Lorelei, she's just. I didn't finish reading. With one swipe of my thumb, delete contact, block caller. The Serafina Vance, who 5 years ago dropped out of Wharton on his word, defying the immense pressure of her family, had just died next to that airport trash can. I spun the steering wheel, merging onto the expressway. Reaching into the center console, I pulled out my encrypted work phone and dialed another number. It's me! Assemble the top executives of every investment bank we own in Manhattan. Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m., my office. The voice on the other end cautiously asked, "Under what pretense, Miss Vance?" "Tell them the Vance family is officially entering the market." I pressed the accelerator. The speedometer needle steadily climbed. The scenery outside blurred past at breakneck speed, much like the 5 wasted years of my life. The Vance family. New York's formidable Vance dynasty. My grandfather was a 4-star general, a hero of a bygone era. My father was the chief of staff for the United States Southern Command. My eldest brother Gideon was a Delta Force operator. My second brother Declan served at the Pentagon. The Vance legacy was built on the blood, sweat, and iron of 3 generations. And I, Serafina Vance, was the only daughter. Once for Thaddeus, I had defied them all. My father had slammed his fist on the mahogany desk in absolute fury. Gideon had shattered his Scotch glass against the fireplace. Declan had stared at me with bloodshot eyes, asking, "Are you out of your mind, little sister?" But I left anyway. Dragging my suitcase, never looking back, I abandoned the family's Greenwich estate just to become a stepping stone for a man. Looking back now, the only thing left to say was, "Serafina, you were an absolute idiot." My phone rang again. I glanced at the screen. Eleanor Thorne, Thaddeus's mother. I hadn't blocked her yet. I didn't do it out of lingering affection. I needed a front row seat to watch their house burn down. "Hello, Sierra, darling." Eleanor's voice was sharp and piercing. "Thad just walked through the door. He's miserable and says you're ignoring him." "What on earth happened?" "Let me tell you right now, don't you dare throw a tantrum. It hasn't been easy for a man to be away for 5 years. You need to be understanding." "Eleanor," I interrupted politely. "How are things with the Brooklyn project? Did Chase Bank approve the loan?" Eleanor was clearly caught off guard. "Why are you suddenly asking about that? Just curious." "Oh, it's a nightmare. Their VP Peter suddenly demanded a mountain of supplemental audits. I have no idea what's gotten into him." "Sarah, you have so many connections in the city. Could you make a call?" "Pull some strings, Eleanor." I smiled, flicking on my turn signal and smoothly taking the exit. In this world, there are some strings that just can't be pulled. I hung up. Eleanor called again. I ignored it. She called a third time. I flipped the phone to silent. By the time my SUV pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Vance estate in Greenwich dusk had settled. The private security guard at the gate saw my license plate froze and snapped a crisp salute. "Miss Vance, you're back." He was so stunned he could barely speak. "Thank you for your service." I nodded. "Is my grandfather home?" "Yes, ma'am. The general is in the conservatory playing chess. I'll announce you." "No need. I'll let myself in." I parked in the circular driveway, killed the engine, and sat in the silence for a moment. The grand oak tree in the front yard was still there. As kids, Declan and I used to climb it while our father chased us around with threats of discipline. The stone patio remained unchanged. Through the French doors, the warm amber light of the study spilled onto the lawn, glowing like a dream that would never end. I pushed the car door open. The moment my heel touched the cobblestones of my childhood home, a sudden sharp sting prickled behind my eyes. I tilted my head back forcefully, swallowing the tears. "Vance daughters do not cry." "Who goes there?" An authoritative, gravelly voice barked from the study. Footsteps. Distant at first, then closer. The rhythmic thump-thump of a mahogany cane against hardwood. I stood in the doorway, watching the white-haired, fiercely upright old man approach. My grandfather looked at me. A microscopic spark flared in his cloudy eyes. Then he let out a heavy scoff. "Finally remembered the way home, did you?" I opened my mouth, but it felt stuffed with cotton. "Grandpa, I need to borrow something from you." "Borrow what? The Vance family banner." He stared at me in silence for so long I thought he might chase me off the porch with his cane. Then he turned around, leaning on his stick, and walked back into the depths of the house. Over his shoulder he barked, "Take it yourself." I stood in the doorway. The tears finally spilled over, but I was smiling because I knew that from this moment on, everything in New York was going to change. Thaddeus Thorne never figured out where I went. He spent the entire day scouring the airport, calling every number he could find. Eventually, his car was stopped at the gates of the Vance estate. The armed private security guard stared at him with dead, impassive eyes. Thaddeus stood under the street lamp, his expression morphing from anxiety to confusion and finally to utter disbelief. He looked up toward the estate. The massive iron gates were locked tight. The brass plaque gleaming in the twilight read simply, Vance. He whispered the word as if realizing who I was for the very first time. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with a message from Caldwell. Miss Serafina Chase Bank has officially denied Thorn Development's loan application. Furthermore, I ran a background check on this Lorelei Mercer. She arrived in New York, drowning in debt. When she was young, her father blew $2 million at underground casinos and fled. She and her mother spent years dodging loan sharks. Also, while attending college in Miami, she had an inappropriate long-term relationship with a local real estate developer. That developer, Caldwell's subsequent text carried a heavier tone. He married a wealthy socialite last year and dumped Lorelei, but she secured a massive hush-money payout by blackmailing him. I arched an eyebrow. So she wasn't a delicate wallflower. She was a venomous snake. Right on cue, my screen lit up with an SMS from an unknown number. Sarah, this is Lorelei. Thad was a bit rude to you at the airport today. I want to apologize on his behalf. Please don't be mad at him. He just missed me so much. We grew up together after all. You won't hold a grudge against me, will you? I stared at the message and let out a chilling laugh. You touch what's mine, and then you try to play the innocent sister, Lorelei Mercer. You picked the wrong target. I tossed the phone aside, picked up my bone china teacup, and took a slow sip. Outside the window, the New York night deepened. Millions of lights illuminated the city, and one of them was about to be snuffed out. The next morning, the phone rang in the executive office of Thorn Development Group. Harrison. His VP's voice trembled. We just received a notification from Vance Holdings. They are launching a hostile buyout of our 3 luxury high-rises in Queens. They're offering 40% below market value. Harrison Thorne's face drained of color. Vance Holdings. What the hell is Vance Holdings? The Vance family, sir. The military family. The VP sounded terrified. Harrison, the Vances have never aggressively entered commercial real estate before. This is a declaration of war. Harrison Thorne dropped the receiver and slumped into his leather chair. At that exact moment on the top floor of the newly acquired Vance Holdings skyscraper, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the concrete jungle. Behind me stood 12 of Wall Street's most ruthless investment analysts. I turned around and tossed a thick dossier onto the mahogany conference table. Gentlemen, get to work. I smiled, though my eyes remained dead. I want Thorn Development Group rebranded under the Vance umbrella within 30 days. 3 days. Only 72 hours had passed since I dumped those sunflowers into the trash bin. New York was still New York. Yellow cabs honking masses of pedestrians surging across crosswalks, the sun rising over the East River. But for the Thorne family, those 72 hours felt longer than the last 3 decades combined. I sat in my penthouse office. Directly across the 4-lane avenue was the headquarters of Thorn Development. We were so close I could practically see the frantic silhouettes pacing behind their glass walls. My building previously, the Empire Tower, boasted 40 stories. It used to be the U.S. headquarters for a struggling European bank. 3 days ago, I instructed Caldwell to buy it outright under Vance Holdings. At the closing, the seller's attorneys asked 3 times if I was genuinely paying all cash. I signed the paperwork and tossed the Mont Blanc pen aside. By 3:00 p.m., the wire transfer cleared. Caldwell, waiting until the room emptied, had lowered his voice. Miss Serafina, the purchase price was $400 million. Well, that is pocket change for the family trust. Shouldn't you have informed the general I? Cut him off, sipping my espresso. My grandfather handed me the banner. How I swing it is my business. Caldwell fell silent. He was a 3rd-generation wealth manager for the Vances. My father grew up under his watch. Even my brothers addressed him respectfully. He knew better than anyone when a Vance woman makes a decision not even a tank can move her. Now I was admiring the Thorne building across the street, 35 floors. The giant Thorne letters on the roof seemed noticeably dimmer today. My phone rang. Eleanor Thorne. It was her 36th call in 3 days. I had ignored the first 35. I answered this one. Sarah. You finally picked up. Her voice was frantic and shrill like a strangled peacock. What on earth is going on with you? Thad is losing his mind trying to find you. And what is with that compound of yours? Thad drove up and an armed guard literally pointed a rifle at him. What is the meaning of this? I leaned against the glass, my tone entirely flat. Eleanor, the gates of the Vance estate have never been opened to just anyone. A stunned silence fell over the line. Eleanor clearly hadn't expected me to speak to her like that. For 5 years, I had been meek, polite, endlessly accommodating. When her blood pressure spiked, I flew in top-tier cardiologists. She loved high-stakes bridge, so I sat with her at the country club until midnight. She criticized my cooking, so I enrolled in a Michelin-starred culinary masterclass the next day. The heiress to the Vance dynasty had played the submissive servant in a lesser family's home for half a decade, all for a man. Remembering it now made me want to slap myself. Sarah. Eleanor's voice shifted, dropping its usual arrogance for careful hesitation. What exactly happened between you and Thad? Is it a misunderstanding? Tell me, I'll fix it. Fix it, I scoffed softly. Eleanor, save your breath. I handle my own affairs. You're acting like a child. By the way, speaking of affairs, I cut her off my tone, suddenly pivoting to razor-sharp politeness, so polite it sounded utterly foreign. Tomorrow evening at 6:00 p.m., I am hosting a housewarming gala on the top floor of the Empire Tower. I would be honored if you and Harrison attended. A courier will deliver the invitation this afternoon. Housewarming. You moved. No. I turned to look at my newly acquired skyscraper. My lips curled. I bought myself a new desk. 40 floors. It's a modest space, but being neighbors with Thorne Development is amusing. By the way, Eleanor, I have a perfect view of Harrison's office from here. From now on, we'll be watching each other across the avenue. Dead silence. I could vividly picture Eleanor's perfectly Botoxed face, jaw dropped, eyes bulging, phone trembling in her manicured hand. You bought the Empire Tower. That building sat on the market for 2 years because no one could afford the liquidity. $400 million. Yes, I took it. Where did you get that kind of money? I laughed. It was a light, airy sound, but every syllable drove like a spike into the receiver. Eleanor, you seem to have forgotten. My last name is Vance. I hung up, pressing the intercom button on my desk. Harper, are the invitations ready? Miss Vance, all delivered via courier to your approved list. Every one of Manhattan's top 50 firms received theirs. And the Thornes. You requested to hand-deliver the Thorne family's invitation personally, ma'am. I picked up the heavy gold foil-stamped invitation on my desk. The crimson cardstock bore a single line. Vance Holdings cordially invites Mr. Harrison Thorne and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne to a corporate housewarming. Location, Empire Tower Penthouse. July 1-5-600 p.m. Signed with 2 words. Serafina Vance. No titles. No pleasantries. Those 2 words were more than enough. I grabbed the envelope and walked out. At 3:00 p.m., I stood before the wrought iron doors of the Thorne family's Upper East Side townhouse. I had walked through these doors countless times over 5 years. I had personally commissioned the landscaping in their courtyard. I had selected the baccarat crystal chandelier in the foyer alongside Eleanor. Every time I visited, I arrived bearing extravagant gifts, calling out cheerfully like the perfect daughter-in-law. Eleanor would barely look up from her iPad, offering a dismissive grunt before critiquing whatever I brought her. Today, I arrived empty-handed, save for 1 envelope. The housekeeper, Maria, opened the door. Seeing me, she froze before breaking into a wide smile. Miss Sarah, come in, come in. The missus is in the drawing room. I nodded and stepped inside. The Thorne living room was as lavishly tacky as ever. Questionable modern art collected by Harrison littered the walls. The velvet European-style sofa was stiff and uncomfortable. Eleanor Thorne lounged on the sofa in a deep plum silk robe, her blowout immaculate. Seeing me, muscle memory almost triggered her usual barrage of nagging, but remembering our phone call, she forced a stiff, unnatural smile. Sarah, you're here. She sat up straight, eyeing me up and down. Why didn't you call ahead, Maria? Bring tea. No tea. I sat on the armchair opposite her, tossing the crimson envelope onto the glass coffee table. I brought your invitation. Eleanor glanced at the gold foil, but didn't touch it. Sarah, she sighed, puffing out her chest to project authority. We need to have a serious talk about you and Thad. You're a young woman, and a little pouting is expected, but cutting off all contact, Thad just got back from a war zone. You cannot be this irrational. Eleanor, I interrupted, my voice, smooth and rhythmic. I didn't come here to discuss Thaddeus Thorne. Then what do you want to discuss? The Brooklyn project? Your commercial loan was denied, wasn't it? Eleanor's face instantly changed. The Thornes had purchased that Brooklyn land for $60 million last year, banking on the Chase loan to begin construction. Now the loan was frozen, the capital trapped. Did she know how much interest was bleeding out daily? And your 3 luxury developments in Queens, I continued, crossing my legs and leaning back. The Department of Buildings just revoked your permits. Reason catastrophic fire safety violations. Tell me, Eleanor, who do you think suggested the DOB run a surprise audit? Eleanor's complexion shifted from pale to a sickly gray, then flushed a mottled purple. Serafina Vance, she hissed through gritted teeth. What the hell are you planning? Nothing much. I stood up, tapping the envelope closer to her. I just wanted to formally invite you and Harrison to my gala tomorrow. As a junior breaking into the market, it's only polite. I invite my elders to celebrate. Are you trying to make an example out of us? An example. I looked down at her, a smirk playing on my lips. Eleanor, this is just the appetizer. One frozen project won't kill Thorn development. It'll just bleed you. But I leaned in, lowering my voice to a dangerous whisper. Your investments in the Queen's logistics hub. You used offshore capital for that. Tell me, is the origin of that money? Clean Eleanor's head snapped up. Pure, unadulterated terror flooded her eyes. How do you know about that? I know significantly more than you think. I straightened up and turned toward the foyer. After a few steps, I paused and glanced back. By the way, I heard Lorelei Mercer moved in with you. You always said she was such a sweet, pure-hearted girl. Well, now she's here. Enjoy her. I walked out of the townhouse without looking back. The second the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I heard the distinct shatter of glass. Eleanor must have thrown the Baccarat crystal ashtray, the very one I had bought for her. Before getting into my car, I glanced up at the second-floor window. The sheer curtain twitched. A face peered out. Lorelei Mercer. I didn't stop. I slid into the driver's seat and ignited the engine. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Sarah. A soft, pitiful, breathy voice floated through the speakers. Lorelei Mercer. Her tone was calculatedly sweet, gentle but not cloying, timid but not weak. I know you're furious with me, but I truly never meant to steal Thad away. We just grew up together. He sees me as a sister. Miss Mercer, I interrupted, my tone icy and flat. You have excellent vocal control. Did you use the same inflection when speaking to that real estate developer down in Miami? The line went dead silent, the kind of silence that happens when the oxygen is sucked out of a room. I don't know what you're talking about. When she finally spoke, the sickly sweetness was gone, replaced by a razor-thin edge of panic. Sarah, I think you have a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I chuckled. Then please explain why last December an appointment at the South Beach Fertility Clinic was booked under your name. And why the emergency contact was Julian Roth, a man who sells construction materials and happened to marry the daughter of the Miami Chamber of Commerce president just a few weeks later. On his wedding day, you posted a very cryptic Instagram story, rotten hell. Would you like me to continue, Miss Mercer? A sharp intake of breath hissed through the phone. Lorelei's voice dropped its innocent facade completely. It turned cold, jagged, and venomous. Serafina Vance. What do you want? Nothing. I steered the SUV onto the avenue. Just a friendly reminder. You failed to secure your bag in Miami, so you dragged yourself to New York hunting for a new sugar daddy. Not a terrible strategy, but I paused. You picked the wrong man. Thaddeus Thorn is mine. He is mine! Lorelei's voice shrieked, the mask entirely shattered. I've loved him since we were kids. Do you have any idea what I survived in Miami? Do you know how long I waited for this opening? I worked so hard to make Thad, to make him what I sneered. Believe you're still the little neighborhood girl chasing him around Lorelei. Every tear you shed is a spreadsheet. Every Thaddy is a script. I couldn't care less about your gutter trash hustles, but you never ever should have tried to step on me. Serafina Vance. What are you going to do? Kill me. Kill you, I laughed out loud. Miss Mercer, murder is a felony. I am a law-abiding citizen. I pulled the car over to the curb, gripping the phone. But compiling a dossier on your $2 million inherited gambling debt, your mother's scandalous bankruptcy, and your clinic records with Julian Roth and having it FedExed to Thaddeus Thorn, that is entirely legal. Silence. A long, suffocating pause. I almost thought she had hung up. Then a low chuckle echoed from her end. Serafina Vance, Lorelei said, You're ruthless, but you won't beat me. Her voice sharpened to a needlepoint. Because you don't understand men. You don't know how to make a man pity you. You don't know how to make him physically unable to let you go. You're too domineering. Men despise women who hold all the power, don't they? I put the car back in drive. We'll see about that. I hung up. Merging back into the evening traffic, I rolled down the window, letting the cool breeze bite at my skin. My phone vibrated again. Thaddeus Thorn. I watched his name flash for 3 seconds before swiping to answer. Sarah. His voice sounded like sandpaper dragging over rusted iron. He clearly hadn't slept. You finally answered. What? Why are you doing this? His voice carried an agony I had never heard from him. If I did something to hurt you, take it out on me. Why attack my family's company? Do you know my father went half gray in 2 days, Thaddeus? I interrupted calmly. Have you ever asked yourself one simple question? What? Over the last 5 years, did you ever actually know who I am? He froze on the other end. You didn't, I answered for him. You knew my name was Serafina Vance and that I was your fiancé, but you didn't know the weight of the Vance name. You didn't know what I studied at Wharton. And you certainly didn't know why I tolerated the utter degradation I faced inside your house. Sierra, tomorrow, 6:00 p.m., Empire Tower Penthouse. I'm throwing a gala. Be there. I ended the call. My SUV turned into the Vance estate. I killed the engine and sat in the quiet. The faint scent of pine and ocean salt drifted through the open window, a nostalgic reminder of my childhood. My screen lit up. A text from Caldwell, Miss Serafina. Security for tomorrow night is locked down. The dossier on Lorelei Mercer is fully compiled. Shall I send it to you now? I replied. Hold it. Tomorrow, I am going to lay all her cards on the table in front of Manhattan's finest. Sending the text, I stepped out of the car and headed toward the main house. Before I even reached the portico, a towering figure stepped out of the shadows, leaning against a stone pillar. Arms crossed over his chest, a cynical smirk playing on his lips. Brother, I paused. Gideon Vance, the eldest son, Delta Force operator. He wore tactical fatigues, the fabric stretching tightly over the heavy musculature of his shoulders. He was 7 years older than me and loved playing the drill sergeant. When I left for Wharton, he drove me. When I cut ties with the family for Thaddeus, he was the one who shattered the Scotch glass. I instinctively took a half step back. You've grown some fangs. Gideon looked me up and down, his smirk widening into a predator's grin. Buying skyscrapers, orchestrating hostile takeovers, laying traps. I heard you even had the estate guards point rifles at the Thorn boy when he came sniffing around. Gideon stared at me for a long time before letting out a booming laugh. It was a mix of exasperation, sympathy, and overwhelming pride that I was his sister. I'll be at your little party tomorrow night to back your play. Don't cause a scene, Gideon. He waved me off, turning toward the gardens. By the way, the general wants you in his study. My stomach dropped. Did Dad say why? Nope. Gideon shrugged. But if you run for the perimeter wall now, you might make it. I took a deep breath and marched toward the study. Whatever was coming, I had to face it. The heavy oak doors were cracked open. The main lights were off, leaving only the pool of amber illumination from an antique banker's lamp on the desk. General Evander Vance sat in that circle of light, reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing a classified briefing. He was 63, his temples silver, but he sat with the rigid posture of a man commanding the war room at Southcom. He projected an aura of absolute gravity that made you want to hold your breath. I stood at the threshold for a full 10 seconds before knocking. Enter. He didn't look up. I walked in and sat in the leather wingback chair opposite him. It was a notoriously uncomfortable chair. Growing up, this was where I sat for interrogations. Evander Vance flipped to the last page, signed it, closed the folder, removed his glasses, and finally looked at me. His eyes were identical to mine, steely, unreadable. Right now, there was no anger in them. We stared at each other in total silence for half a minute. You bought it then, he finally rumbled. His voice was deep, as though every word was filtered through the gravel in his chest. How much? $400 million. He leaned back in his chair, narrowing his eyes. Your grandfather let you take the banner. He keeps his word. I straightened my spine. Dad, I didn't touch the family's old money. I used the capital from the cross-border M&A fund I quietly set up while I was at Wharton. Caldwell has been managing it for me. I didn't take a dime from the family trust for the Empire Tower. Evander stared at me, then grunted. You hide your cards well. Just like me. Like you? He raised an eyebrow. I've been a straight shooter my whole life. I don't play these corporate espionage games. You played the submissive housewife for 5 years, and the second you returned to New York, you bought a skyscraper and declared war. Where did you learn to be so Machiavellian? From you. Nonsense. It's not nonsense. I met his gaze. When you needed funding for the new special ops wing down at Southcom, you sat in the Pentagon lobby for 3 days straight. When they finally approved it, you invited the bureaucrats who stalled you over for a private dinner at the house. You poured them expensive bourbon, smiled, and never brought up the budget. The next morning, half of them were reassigned to desk jobs in Alaska. Dad, that's called playing the long game. The corners of his mouth twitched. You knew how to wait, I said. And so do I. You waited out the Pentagon. I waited out the thorns. And why did you do it? So the Thorns learn that a Vance might bow her head, but she will never let you step on her neck. Silence settled over the study. The faint ticking of a grandfather clock echoed off the wood panels. Evander stood up, walked to the window, and clasped his hands behind his back. His military bearing remained immaculate. Your brother mentioned he's attending your gala tomorrow to support you. He invited himself. He cares about you. Evander turned around. His gaze grew incredibly complex. Sarah, is it truly over with the Thorn boy? You cut off your own flesh and blood for him. Your mother cried for 3 days. Your brothers nearly tore the house apart. For 5 years, you didn't even come home for Christmas. And now you're telling me it's done, and you're burning his empire to the ground? A lump formed in my throat. I swallowed hard. Dad! At the airport, he held another woman right in front of me. Evander didn't say a word, but his knuckles resting on the windowsill turned bone white. I didn't cry, I continued. I didn't make a scene. I threw away his flowers and walked out. For 5 years, I managed his family, fixed his company, paved his road to success, and in the end, he didn't even have the spine to push her away. So yes, it's over. And that's why you're destroying the Thorn family. Not destroying, I corrected. Acquiring. It's a legal corporate takeover. Dad, my background is finance. Thorn Development has been horribly mismanaged. Their assets are inflated and their board is corrupt. Any shark on Wall Street would smell the blood in the water. Evander's expression shifted. He was no longer looking at his daughter. He was evaluating a general on the battlefield. Have you thought this through? I have. And if the Thorn boy comes crawling back, he already tried, I said. I hung up on him. What if he drops to his knees and begs? I paused for 2 seconds. Even better. He can stay on his knees while I sign the liquidation papers. Suddenly, Evander Vance laughed. When he laughed, the hard lines around his eyes softened. I rarely saw him laugh. You are infinitely more like your mother than your brothers are. She was a terror in her youth, too. I blinked in surprise. Evander walked back to his desk, picked up a document he had just signed, and slid it across the mahogany surface. I picked it up. It was a wire transfer authorization for Vance Holdings. The Vance Family Trust was injecting $500 million into my firm, securing a 40% equity stake. The remaining 60% was registered to Serafina Vance. Dad, he held up a hand. Your grandfather gave you the banner. The Vance banner does not retreat. This $500 million isn't play money. It's artillery. Fight however you see fit. If you lose, come home, the family will take care of you. If you win, he paused. If you win, don't forget to come home for Christmas. I gripped the document, my knuckles turning white. Yes, sir. Evander turned his back to me. Dismissed. I have a briefing to read. I stood, walked to the door, and looked back. Dad, thank you. For what? You're my daughter. His voice grew slightly hoarse. 5 years. You never came for the holidays. Every Christmas Eve, your mother still set a plate for you at the table. My eyes stung fiercely. I clenched my jaw, opened the door, and stepped out quickly. In the hallway, Gideon leaned against the wall, an unlit cigar in his teeth. He eyed the folder in my hand. The old man opened the vault. Yes. How much? $500 million. Gideon let out a low whistle. Damn. He went all out. When I asked him to co-sign a new Raptor, he acted like I was asking for his kidney. You wanted a truck to play in the mud. I need capital for a war. Gideon stared at me, then reached out and violently ruffled my hair just like when we were kids. I'll wear my dress blues tomorrow. I swatted his hand away. Gideon, it's a corporate gala. Don't act like a psycho and terrify my investors. Terrify them. He raised an eyebrow. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Let Manhattan know that the Vances don't just know how to hostile take over a company, we know how to shoot too. I rolled my eyes and walked toward my old bedroom. Sarah Gideon called out, his tone suddenly dropping 30 degrees. What? I pulled a background check on this Lorelei Mercer chick. My guys down at Southcom ran her name. His voice was as cold as winter iron. If she steps one toe out of line with you tomorrow, tell me. I'll make sure she never sets foot on the East Coast again. Gideon, we live in a civilized society with laws. Laws don't stop me from having a polite conversation. He bit down on his cigar. I'll talk to her nicely. If she doesn't get the hint, I'll talk to her differently. I shook my head and closed my bedroom door. The daughters of the Vance family are never sweet. By 5:00 p.m. the next evening, the Empire Tower blazed with light. The Vance Holdings logo was mounted in the lobby, crimson lettering on brushed gold sharp as a scalpel. A red carpet spilled onto Park Avenue, flanked by massive floral arrangements. The cards attached read the usual corporate drivel, wishing you unparalleled success to a prosperous future. But the senders were heavyweights: the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, the East Coast Financial Alliance, 3 white shoe law firms, and 4 major investment banks. Greeting guests at the entrance weren't models, but the 8 senior investment directors of Vance Holdings, all in bespoke dark suits, standing in 2 rigid lines. At the helm was Alistair, the Wall Street shark I had personally poached. 37, an MIT Ph.D. in quantitative finance with a decade at Morgan Stanley. I lured him away with an aggressive equity package. Miss Vance Alistair approached swiftly. Half the guest list has arrived. The president of the chamber is speaking with Caldwell now. The Thorns haven't shown yet. Don't rush it, I checked my Cartier watch. 5, 4, 5. They'll come. One more thing. Alistair lowered his voice. We've quietly bought up 49% of Thorn Development's outstanding shares on the secondary market. We are exactly 0.1% away from the SEC threshold, where we have to publicly declare a hostile takeover. Don't pause, I instructed. Tonight, right after the gala, file the paperwork with the SEC. Alistair's pupils dilated slightly, but he gave a sharp nod and went to make the calls. I stood in the grand lobby, glancing up at the baccarat chandelier I had personally selected. It cost 7 figures. Outside, a sudden commotion rippled through the valet line. A black Maybach pulled up to the curb. The door opened and Harrison Thorne stepped out. He wore a charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, but his face looked as though he were walking into an execution, grim, tight, laced with resentment. Eleanor followed, draped in a deep violet Valentino gown and a string of South Sea pearls. She clung to her husband's arm, her chin tilted up in a defiant, "Let's see what you've done," pose. Then Thaddeus emerged. He was in a sharp black suit, his tie slightly askew. He looked pale, the dark circles under his eyes prominent. The moment he stepped out, his eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto me. He walked straight toward me. Sarah. He stopped a few feet away, his Adam's apple bobbing as if 1,000 words were lodged in his throat. Mr. Thorne, I nodded, greeting him with the polished indifference reserved for minor business associates. Welcome. Sarah, please don't do this, Mr. Thorne. I cut him off my gaze, sliding past his shoulder to the Maybach. Your +1 is waiting. Thaddeus stiffened and turned. The last to exit the vehicle was Lorelei Mercer. Tonight, she wore a pale yellow slip dress, her hair braided loosely over one shoulder, her makeup flawlessly minimal. She looked like a dandelion that might scatter in the wind, fragile, pure, begging to be protected. She walked up on thin heels, timidly standing next to Thaddeus, and looked at me with lowered, fearful eyes. Sarah, her voice was a soft whisper. Thank you for inviting us. I'm just so happy for Thad that you're doing so well in New York. I smiled. Don't mention it, Miss Mercer. Please go on up. Without offering her a second glance, I turned toward the private elevators. The crowd naturally parted for me. Alistair and my executives fell into step behind me, their leather shoes striking the marble in military unison. As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught Lorelei's reflection in the polished steel. She was staring at me, and there was nothing fragile about her eyes. The penthouse spanned the entire 40th floor, converted into a sprawling ballroom with 360-degree views of the Manhattan skyline. A 60-foot banquet table commanded the center, loaded with champagne towers and Michelin-grade hors d'oeuvres. Over 100 guests, New York's absolute elite, mingled. When I entered, the chatter died down. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me, curious, respectful, calculating, and hungry for drama. I ignored them all, walking straight to the head of the room. Caldwell leaned in, whispering, Miss Serafina, the board is set. Out of the top 50 firms, 42 attended. The 8 who declined are deeply intertwined with Thorn Development. I've logged their names. I nodded, took a flute of champagne, and turned to face the room. Ladies and gentlemen, my voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence. Thank you for joining me. I am Serafina Vance, CEO of Vance Holdings. I invited you here tonight to celebrate the opening of our new headquarters, but also to make an announcement. I paused. Every eye was on me. To my left, Harrison Thorne looked physically ill. Eleanor was gripping his arm, her lips pressed into a thin white line. Thaddeus stared unblinking, desperately searching my face for something. Lorelei, clinging to his arm, maintained her saccharine smile. As of today, Vance Holdings is aggressively entering the Manhattan commercial real estate sector. Our first acquisition. Through aggressive secondary market purchases, we have secured 49% of Thorn Development Group, Tomorrow morning, before the opening bell, we will formally file with the SEC for a total hostile takeover. The words hit the room like a fragmentation grenade. Whispers erupted into shock. Harrison Thorne's face drained from gray to a sickly translucent white. He lunged forward, his voice cracking. "Serafina Vance, you have lost your goddamn mind, Harrison," I smiled politely. "Business is war. Survival goes to the fittest. You taught me that yourself in your boardroom. I am simply returning your wisdom. You're using Vance family money to crush us. What does this prove about your abilities? You're just hiding behind your grandfather." "Harrison," I sliced through his rant, my tone dropping to a lethal calm. "Allow me to remind you of something. I've audited Thorne Development's financials for the past 3 years. That offshore capital you pumped into the Queen's project, the paper trail is filthy. If I hand my forensic audit to the SEC and the feds, how much longer do you think Thorne Development stays out of federal court?" Harrison's jaw snapped shut. He couldn't form a single word. Eleanor couldn't contain herself. She shoved past her husband, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You ungrateful bitch. Our family took you in for 5 years. We housed you, we put up with you, and now you bite the hand that fed you. Do you have a shred of human decency?" "Eleanor," I turned my dead eyes on her. "We both know who was feeding whom for the last 5 years. Who bribed the DOB inspectors to overlook your structural failures in Brooklyn. Who buried the embezzlement scandal that nearly put your husband in a jumpsuit. And who quietly liquidated assets to cover the $2 million you lost at the underground baccarat tables in Macau." Eleanor's hand froze. Mid-air. Her lips trembled. "Your family," I hissed, "owes me." The room was graveyard silent. Then Lorelei Mercer spoke up. Her voice was weak and wavering, but perfectly pitched to carry. "Sarah." She flushed, red tears welling in her eyes. "I know you hate me. You think I stole Thad from you. But you can't force love. Thad's heart made its choice. You can't use your money to destroy his entire family just because you're a jilted ex. It was a brilliant pivot. Avoid the financials. Ignore the corruption. Drag the narrative back to a petty catfight over a man making the Wall Street elite view my takeover as a hysterical woman's revenge." I looked at her and smiled. "You make an excellent point, miss." "Mercer, you cannot force love, which is why I stepped aside to let you be together. But tell me." I raised my voice so the back of the room could hear. "Are you with Thaddeus Thorne for his heart or his wallet?" Panic flashed in Lorelei's eyes. "What? What are you implying?" "I imply nothing. I have facts." I took a thick manila envelope from Alistair and held it up. "I have the complete dossier of Miss Lorelei Mercer's history in Miami, including the police reports regarding your father's $2 million gambling debts to the Vargas Syndicate, including the records from the South Beach Fertility Clinic, and including the wire transfer receipts between you and Miami real estate tycoon Julian Roth." Lorelei turned the color of chalk. "You're lying!" she shrieked, the fragile facade shattering. "She's slandering me, Thad! She's lying!" She dug her manicured nails into Thaddeus's suit jacket. Thaddeus didn't look at her. He was staring at me. His eyes held shock, confusion, and a creeping, horrific realization. "Sarah," he whispered. "Is this true? The proof is right here." I tossed the envelope onto the nearest cocktail table. "Read it yourself." Thaddeus didn't move toward the envelope. He slowly looked down at Lorelei, whose face was contorted in sheer panic. "Thad, you have to believe me." The tears flowed freely now. "I love you. I've loved you since we were kids, Julian Roth. He tricked me. He promised to marry me. You were with him." Thaddeus's voice was hollow. Lorelei opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "You were at a fertility clinic with him." Lorelei Thaddeus reached down and pried her fingers off his jacket one by one. "You lied to me since the moment I stepped off the plane." There was no rage in his voice, only a crushing, absolute void. He turned around and strode out of the ballroom. Lorelei stood, frozen mascara running down her cheeks. She whipped her head toward me, her eyes practically bleeding with hatred. "Serafina Vance, you are going to regret this." "I'm waiting," I replied casually. Lorelei hiked up her yellow dress and sprinted awkwardly after Thaddeus. The room remained dead silent. Harrison and Eleanor stood like petrified statues, utterly humiliated. I picked up a fresh glass of champagne, turned to the crowd of billionaires, and offered a slight smile. "My apologies for the interruption. Please, gentlemen, enjoy the evening." The jazz band smoothly resumed playing. But I knew this was only the beginning. 10 seconds after Lorelei bolted the room's ambient noise returned. Wall Street titans have a masterful ability to act blind when the truth is inconvenient. They went back to sipping Macallan and talking term sheets, but I knew exactly what they were calculating. Is it time to abandon the sinking ship that is Thorn Development? Harrison and Eleanor lasted another 3 minutes before slinking toward the elevators. Before stepping in, Eleanor turned and locked eyes with me. Her glare was a toxic cocktail of hatred, humiliation, and a newfound, very real terror. I raised my flute to her and smirked. Her face contorted and the doors slid shut. Caldwell materialized from a side door, leaning in close. Miss Serafina. Thaddeus Thorne just had a massive public blowout with Lorelei down on Park Avenue. He left her on the curb and took a cab alone. Oh, I arched an eyebrow. She stood there for 10 minutes, then made a phone call. 7 minutes long. I had the number traced. It was Eleanor Thorne. I chuckled. Predictable. Grifters like Lorelei always scurry back to their safest enabler when exposed. Thaddeus dumped her, so she's playing the victim card with his mother. Eleanor always claimed Lorelei was the sweetest girl in the world. Let her handle the fallout. Miss Serafina, one more detail. Caldwell's expression tightened. The organizers for tomorrow night's charity gala at the plaza just informed me the Thorne family added a +1 to their table. Lorelei Mertzer. I froze, then laughed outright. Eleanor truly has a death wish. Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. You are already slated to attend, ma'am. Should I arrange for security to bar her entry? No. I waved him off. Let her come. She wants to parade around Manhattan's high society. I'll give her a stage. Caldwell bowed his head and stepped back. He knew that when a Vance smiled and offered a stage, it usually meant a public execution. The gala wrapped at 9:00 p.m. After seeing off the last CEO, I stood by the glass looking at the Thorne building. A few lights were still on. Their finance team was likely pulling an all-nighter. The Brooklyn project was frozen, their loans blocked, their Queens permits yanked. Their cash flow had to be bleeding dry. My phone buzzed. Thaddeus Thorne. I answered. Sarah. His voice was raw, shredded. I ran the checks. Lorelei. Her father really owes the Vargas Syndicate $2 million, and my contacts verified the clinic records. It's all real. He sounded broken. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Sooner, I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. Thaddeus, think back. How many times over the last 5 years did I tell you to look closer at Lorelei's motives? What did you say? She's just a sweet girl. Sarah, you're being paranoid. Silence. You chose to believe a childhood crush you hadn't seen in a decade over the fiancé who kept your family out of federal prison for 5 years. I stated, completely devoid of emotion. I have nothing else to say. Sarah, he begged. I know I was wrong. I was so damn wrong. Give me a chance. Thaddeus, I interrupted. Do you know why I humiliated Lorelei in front of the entire city tonight? Because one night at the country club, your mother looked me in the eye and said, Serafina, you are beneath my son. Aside from your looks, what do you bring to the table? Your brothers get the Vance inheritance. You get nothing. Every word your family spat at me over 5 years I carved into my memory. Tonight, I wanted Manhattan to decide if the daughter of the Vance dynasty was beneath the Thorne family. Dead silence on the line. Finally, a ragged sigh. Sarah, I'm sorry. I said nothing. Lorelei is going to be at the charity gala tomorrow. My mother got her a ticket. Thaddeus's voice tightened. Sarah, could you not? Not humiliate her again. I laughed coldly. You're still defending her. I'm not defending her. I'm worried about you. His tone dropped to a harsh whisper. Lorelei isn't just a gold digger. When I was running background checks today, I found out she's tied to some heavy players down in Miami. Dangerous people, Sarah. I'm aware I cut him off. Thanks for the tip. I hung up. I stared out at the city. Tied to heavy players in Miami, I texted Caldwell dig deeper into Lorelei's Miami contacts, specifically who bridged the gap between Julian Roth dumping her and her arrival in NYC. Caldwell replied instantly. Understood. The next evening, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was blindingly opulent. The annual Manhattan Chamber of Commerce charity gala was the crown jewel of the social season. Men in bespoke Tom Ford tuxedos and women in Oscar de la Renta gowns sipped vintage Dom Perignon, pretending to care about philanthropy while cutting backroom deals. I wore a plunging emerald green velvet gown, my hair swept up to expose my collarbones. At my ears hung vintage Cartier emerald drops heirlooms from my grandmother. My left hand bore only the Vance family signet ring. Walking to my left was Gideon. He actually wore his army dress blues. The medals and commendations pinned to his chest gleamed under the chandeliers. The moment he strode into the room, the ambient temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The hedge fund billionaires who usually commanded rooms instinctively averted their eyes when Gideon passed. In New York, old money fears new money, but both fear men who kill for a living. The Vances possessed all three. Nervous Gideon leaned down his voice, a low rumble. That Mercer girl is here. How do you want to handle her, Gideon? I sighed. Stop sounding like a mob enforcer. People will think I brought a hitman. He scoffed. If I hit her, I don't need an excuse. I rolled my eyes, grabbing a flute of champagne and wading into the crowd. I was immediately surrounded by the president of the chamber, the CEO of Chase Bank, and several real estate moguls. Congratulations on the takeover, Miss Vance. Brilliant play. I smiled and nodded, but my eyes scanned the entrance. They arrived. Harrison and Eleanor led the way, their smiles painfully forced. Harrison looked exhausted. Eleanor wore an overly flashy diamond necklace, clearly compensating for her bruised ego. Behind them walked Thaddeus, looking like a dead man walking. And then Lorelei. She wore a stunning white off-the-shoulder gown, an elegant pearl choker at her neck. She looked like a tragic heroine from a Gatsby party, poised, vulnerable, seeking sanctuary. She clung to Thaddeus's arm, projecting a serene smile as if yesterday's absolute destruction hadn't happened. A+ for sociopathic resilience. The auction began. We sat at the head table with the heavy hitters. The Thorns were seated 3 tables back, a deliberate snub by the organizers. Eleanor glared daggers at the back of my head. The auctioneer droned on, selling off yachts, modern art, and private islands. Finally, the headline lot was presented. Ladies and gentlemen, a stunning museum-quality antique Cartier emerald parure. Necklace, earrings, and bracelet. Donated anonymously. Starting bid, $1 million. Bids in increments of $100 000. Before anyone could raise a paddle, Lorelei's soft voice echoed through the silent room. Thad, look how gorgeous they are. I saw a fake set in Miami once, but these are breathtaking. She leaned over to Eleanor. Eleanor, haven't you always wanted a proper emerald set? Eleanor's eyes lit up. She nudged Harrison. Harrison scowled and muttered something about frozen assets. Eleanor's face flushed with indignation. It's just an auction, she hissed loud enough for me to hear. Are we truly that broke? Just as the auctioneer raised his gavel, I lifted my paddle. $2.5 million. The room gasped. From $1 million straight to $2.5. It wasn't an auction. It was an execution. Vance Holdings bids $2.5 million. The auctioneer stammered, thrilled. Do I hear 2.6? Lorelei raised her paddle. $3 million. She stared at me from 3 tables away, her smile sickly sweet. Sarah, I'm sorry. Eleanor really loves this set. You won't fight me for it, will you? Her emphasis on the word fight wasn't about the jewelry. The room buzzed. Everyone knew what was happening. I smiled. $5 million. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Lorelei's smile faltered, but she raised her paddle. $5.5 million. Set $1 million. $8 million. Lorelei shouted, her voice shrill. Harrison Thorne grabbed her wrist, his face a mask of terror. Are you insane? We don't have that kind of liquidity. I'll pay for it myself, Harrison. Lorelei snapped quietly. She locked eyes with me, her chin raised in defiance. She assumed I was playing a game of chicken. She assumed I'd drive the price up to $15 million, and then she would graciously bow out, looking like the victim who gracefully ceded to the billionaire bully, winning Thaddeus's sympathy. She calculated everything perfectly. Except one thing. I set my paddle face down on the tablecloth. $8 million going once the auctioneer called. $8 million going twice. Sold to Miss Lorelei Mercer for $8 million. The gavel slammed down like a judge's sentence. Lorelei's smile froze on her face. She realized what had just happened. I had trapped her on a pedestal that cost $8 million and walked away. Miss Mercer, how incredibly generous. I raised my champagne glass toward her. $8 million for emeralds. When your friends in Miami hear about this, they'll be green with envy. It wasn't the sum that made the blood drain from Lorelei's face. It was the word Miami. Thaddeus turned to her slowly. Lorelei, where did you get $8 million? You just told my father you're paying for it yourself. Thaddeus's voice was arctic. You make 60 grand a year. Where did you get $8 million? I picked up my glass, stood, and walked smoothly over to their table. The entire room watched in breathless silence. Could it be the remainder of Julian Roth's hush money? I asked pleasantly. Lorelei shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. The elegant, tragic heroine act evaporated into rabid panic. Serafina Vance, stop lying. Lying, I pulled a folded document from my clutch and dropped it onto her plate. Bank statements from Julian Roth's offshore accounts. Last November, he wired $2 million to a shell company in your name. The memo reads, "Final settlement. Tell me, miss." Mercer, how are you going to cover an $8 million bid when your sugar daddy only gave you 2? The ballroom erupted. The pretense of high society manners vanished as billionaires openly pointed and whispered. A few pulled out their phones to record. Eleanor Thorne looked as though she were going to vomit. Thaddeus stood up, towering over Lorelei. There was no rage, left only exhaustion. Your father owed the Vargas syndicate $2 million. You slept with Roth to pay off the mob, didn't you? Lorelei broke down sobbing. But this time it was ugly. I had no choice. The loan sharks were coming to my mother's house. He promised to marry me, Thad. He used me. She spun toward me, her eyes manic. Are you happy now, Serafina? You ruined me. Are you happy? I looked at her, my smile fading into cold indifference. You ruined yourself. You took his money and targeted my fiancé. That was your choice. But let me make one thing crystal clear. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. You mistook my patience for weakness. The Vances don't throw the first punch. But if you step on our necks, we will bury you. Those are my rules. Lorelei stared at me as if seeing a monster. Then she let out a hollow, terrifying laugh. You think you've won. You dug into Miami, you found Roth, you found the clinic, but you missed someone, Sarah. I frowned slightly. Who? She didn't answer. She snatched her clutch, shoved past the waiters, and bolted toward the exit. Halfway down the aisle, she turned back. You're going to regret this, Serafina. Then she vanished through the double doors. The room hummed with chaos. Gideon appeared at my side, his hand resting heavy on my shoulder. What did she say to you? She said I missed someone. I looked at Gideon, a knot tightening in my stomach. Gideon, do you know her? His face remained a stone mask. No. Are you sure? I'm sure, he patted my shoulder. Party's over. Let's go home. As we walked to the car, my phone vibrated. A text from Caldwell. 3 words. Call me immediately. I stepped away from Gideon and dialed. Caldwell. Miss Serafina Caldwell's voice had never sounded so grave. I dug into Lorelei's Miami connections. She's not operating alone. She's a proxy for a man named Corbin Blackwood. I don't have his full profile yet, but I know one thing. He has a vendetta against the Vance family. A very old one. My hand tightened on the phone. How old? 17 years ago. The classified intelligence leak at Southcom headquarters. My blood ran ice cold. 17 years ago. The intelligence leak at Southcom in Miami. The investigation spearheaded by my father, General Evander Vance. Miss Serafina Caldwell's voice sounded muffled, like I was underwater. I took a deep breath. Keep digging. Find Corbin Blackwood. I hung up and looked back at the glowing facade of the plaza. You didn't come for Thaddeus. You came for the Vances. Whoever you are, whoever is backing you, I will not let you touch my family. The name Caldwell uttered drove into my spine like an ice pick. 17 years ago, I was 11. I don't remember much from that year, except that my father stopped coming home for dinner. My mother would sit at the mahogany dining table, her meals untouched, a look of sheer petrified dread on her face. Gideon was pulled out of his Rangers training pipeline and summoned home. Declan locked himself in his room for weeks. From the hushed whispers of the staff, I pieced it together. A catastrophic intelligence leak at U.S. Southern Command. Classified operational blueprints detailing covert deployments in Latin America had been sold to a foreign adversary. My father, then Chief of Staff, was ordered by the Pentagon to lead the internal witch hunt. For 3 months, the Greenwich estate felt like a tomb. Father came home with bloodshot eyes so volatile that even Gideon avoided him. Ultimately, they found the mole, a high-ranking intelligence officer named Elias Blackwood. He had taken a massive bribe, photographed the blueprints, and handed them over. Elias was court-martialed and sentenced to life at Leavenworth. Rumor was right before he was dragged out of the tribunal. He locked eyes with my father and screamed, Evander, Vance, you owe me. I will haunt you from the grave. 3 years into his sentence, Elias Blackwood died of a sudden heart attack in his cell. The incident became a taboo in our house, and now Caldwell was telling me that Corbin Blackwood was pulling Lorelei's strings, seeking vengeance for a 7-year-old ghost. I sat in the back of my SUV, the neon lights of Times Square washing over my face. Caldwell, I said into the phone. Miss Serafina, I found a link. Lorelei communicated with Blackwood through a Miami middleman, a loan shark named Silas Vargas in Little Havana. He launders money and handles dirty work. I'm flying to Miami tomorrow morning. Miss Serafina, no. Caldwell's voice turned to steel. This is a direct threat to the family. Let me send a team. If anything happens to you, I cannot face the general. Do not tell my father. And absolutely do not tell Gideon. I kept my voice low. If Gideon finds out, he will fly to Miami with a Delta squad and turn Little Havana into a war zone. I am going to figure out exactly what Blackwood wants first. Caldwell was silent. Fine, but I am sending 2 of my own operatives to flank you, Maddox and Harper. Understood. The next morning, the humid, salt-heavy air of Miami hit my face as I walked out of MIA. Miami wasn't New York. New York was rules, order, and stealth wealth. Miami was neon, flash, and unapologetic hustle. A rugged man in his 30s with a military buzz cut and a faded linen shirt approached me. Maddox. Behind him stood Harper, a sharp-eyed corporate lawyer I had poached from Skadden. Miss. Vance Maddox opened the door of a black Escalade. Silas Vargas runs a pawn shop down in Little Havana. It's a front for his loan sharking operations. He has cops and cartel guys in his pocket. He might not want to talk. I don't need him to want to talk, I said, getting in. We pulled up to a dilapidated street in Little Havana. Between cafecito stands and cigar shops sat a dingy storefront with a faded sign, Vargas Pawn and Loan. We walked in. The air was thick with the smell of old brass and stale tobacco. A massive guy behind bulletproof glass looked up. Maddox flashed a specific insignia ring. The guy nodded and buzzed us into the back room. Silas Vargas sat behind a metal desk counting stacks of $100 bills. He wore a loud silk shirt and a heavy gold chain. He looked up, a greasy smile spreading across his face. Well, Wall Street comes to Cali Ocho. You're the Vance girl. I sat in the folding chair across from him. Mr. Vargas, I'm looking for Corbin Blackwood. The smile vanished. He waved his hand, and his bodyguard locked the heavy steel door behind us. Miss Vance Vargas's voice dropped to a gravelly rasp. I don't know who dropped that name, but you need to take your private jet back to New York. People who go looking for Corbin Blackwood end up in the Everglades. Maddox stepped forward, his hand slipping inside his jacket. I held up a finger, stopping him. Mr. Vargas, I said smoothly, I'm not here to start a war. I just want to know how Blackwood connected with Lorelei Mercer. Tell me, and I walk away. Don't tell me and my friends at the Treasury Department audit every single shell company you run through the Caymans. Your choice. Vargas stared at me. He weighed his options: the wrath of Corbin Blackwood versus the annihilating power of the Vance dynasty. He chuckled, a dark, raspy sound. You Vances don't mess around. He unlocked a floor safe, pulled out a ledger, and slid it to me. 3 years ago, Lorelei Mercer came to me begging for a loan. Her old man owed the syndicate $2 million. I was going to put her on the street to work it off, but Corbin Blackwood walked in and paid her debt in cash. In exchange, he owned her. His goal was Thaddeus Thorne. No, Vargas lit a cigar. His goal was you. Thaddeus was just the bait to break you. Blackwood got drunk in here once. Said General Vance slaughtered his family 17 years ago. Said he was going to make the general's daughter pay the debt with interest. My blood ran cold. Elias Blackwood was his brother. Yeah, Corbin's a ghost, Miss Vance. Uses burners, moves money through crypto. But he has one weakness. Vargas exhaled a cloud of smoke. Tomorrow is the 15th. Every 15th of the month, he visits his brother's grave at a private cemetery on Key Biscayne. Thank you, Mr. Vargas. I stood up and dropped a business card on his desk. Vance Holdings might need local logistics in Miami someday. We'll be in touch. That night in my suite at the Mandarin Oriental, I couldn't sleep. The Miami skyline glittered outside, but my mind was trapped 17 years in the past. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed my father. It rang for a long time. Sarah General Evander Vance's voice was thick with sleep. Dad, I need to ask you about the Southcom leak. Elias Blackwood. Was he actually guilty? The silence on the line was so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. Why are you asking about this? His voice was instantly wide awake, rigid with alarm. Where are you? I'm in Miami. Elias Blackwood's brother is hunting me. A long, agonizing pause. Then Evander let out a sigh, a sound of immense exhaustion and profound regret I had never heard from him. Elias Blackwood. Evander spoke softly. He was guilty. He handed the blueprints to foreign operatives. We had the surveillance, the wiretaps. It was ironclad. Then why does his brother think you destroyed their family? Evander cleared his throat. After Elias was court-martialed, his wife came to my office. She dropped to her knees sobbing. She swore Elias was coerced. She claimed the foreign operatives kidnapped their infant son and threatened to kill him if Elias didn't steal the files. She begged me to reopen the investigation. I stopped breathing. Did you? I looked into it, Evander's voice ground out like sandpaper, but we found zero evidence. No ransom calls, no proof of a kidnapping. Elias himself never claimed coercion during his interrogation. The Pentagon was breathing down my neck to close the PR nightmare. I shut the case. And the wife. She moved back to Ohio. A year later, she took her own life. Her other son, Corbin, ended up in the foster system. My hands trembled, not out of fear, but out of a sickening realization. My father had compromised. To protect the military's reputation and secure his own promotion, he ignored a desperate woman's plea. And that compromise had birthed a monster named Corbin Blackwood. "Dad," I whispered. "I'll handle this, Sarah. Don't I?" hung up. The Key Biscayne Cemetery overlooked the Atlantic Ocean. A storm had just rolled through, leaving the headstones slick with rain and the air smelling of ozone and salt. I told Maddox to wait at the gates and walked up the manicured hill alone. I found Elias Blackwood's grave. A modest granite slab. A fresh bouquet of white lilies rested against it. I turned around. A man stood 30 feet away under a banyan tree. He looked about 40, dressed in a tailored linen suit, his sleeves rolled up. He looked like a tenured professor or a wealth manager. But his eyes were the dead, flat gray of a winter ocean. Serafina Vance, Corbin Blackwood's voice carried over the ocean breeze. "You got here faster than I calculated. I sent Lorelei back to New York to play with you a little longer. The Vances are efficient. I'll give you that." "You should have come for my father," I said, standing my ground. "Targeting an 11-year-old girl is cowardice." Corbin smiled a terrifyingly serene expression. "General Vance is holed up in a fortress in Greenwich. He's untouchable. But you were playing house in the Thorne penthouse without a security detail. You were the soft underbelly. So you bought Lorelei's dead and weaponized her." "Precisely," Corbin walked closer. "Her mission was to rip Thaddeus away from you, to isolate you. And once you were emotionally shattered, I was going to use her to dig into Thorne Development's servers and frame you for federal embezzlement. If General Vance's golden daughter went to federal prison, the Vance dynasty would crumble." "You miscalculated," I replied, my voice steady over the sound of crashing waves. "Every ledger I touched is pristine. Every contract is bulletproof. The daughters of the Vance family leave no loose ends." Corbin's smile hardened. Furthermore, I took a step toward him. "My father was wrong to rush the investigation. I admit that. But Corbin, your brother committed treason. Whatever his reasons, he sold American operatives out. You hate my family because you need a scapegoat for your own helplessness." "Shut up!" Corbin snapped his serene mask, cracking veins bulging on his neck. "They kidnapped his son, my nephew. They forced him to do it, and your bastard father covered it up." "Then why didn't you go to the FBI?" I shouted back. "You were 18 when it happened. Why didn't you testify?" "Because you knew there was no proof. You needed a villain, so you chose us." Corbin lunged forward, his fist raised. Crack. A deafening gunshot echoed over the cemetery. The bark of the banyan tree, inches from Corbin's head, exploded into splinters. "Take another step, Blackwood, and the next one goes through your skull." I spun around. Gideon was walking up the paved path. He was in civilian tactical gear, an M4 carbine raised to his shoulder. Behind him, Maddox and 4 heavily armed private military contractors fanned out lasers painting Corbin's chest. Corbin froze. He looked at the lasers, then at Gideon, and began to laugh. An unhinged, hollow laugh. Gideon Vance Corbin sneered. "The whole royal family is here. Perfect." He reached into his pocket. Maddox tensed, raising his weapon, but Corbin slowly pulled out a silver USB drive. This drive, Corbin held it up, contains the unredacted transcripts of my brother's interrogation. The pages your father ripped out and destroyed. The pages where Elias begged them to find his kidnapped son. "If I release this to the press, the Vance legacy burns to ashes." "Give me the drive." Gideon's voice was a low growl. "Beg for it," Corbin spat. "I want Serafina on her knees apologizing for her father. Then you confess to the press." Or I hit send. Silence. The wind whipped through the trees. Then I laughed. "Corbin," I said, "do you know what's actually on that drive?" I pulled out my phone and hit speaker. "Caldwell. Tell him." Caldwell's voice rang out crisp and clear over the speaker. "Miss Serafina, per your orders last night, I tracked down the retired chief archivist from Southcom. The missing pages from Elias Blackwood's interrogation were not destroyed by your father." They were redacted under standard procedure because Elias had blurted out classified locations of safe houses in Bogota which had to be scrubbed from the public record. Corbin's face twitched. Furthermore, Caldwell continued, when your sister-in-law reported the kidnapping, Southcom didn't ignore it. I pulled the classified logs. A JSOC team spent 3 months ripping Miami and the Caribbean apart looking for the boy. They found the foreign handler. The handler confessed. There was no kidnapping. They simply told Elias they had his son to force his compliance. The boy was with his mother in Ohio the entire time. Elias died believing a lie. And you have lived your life believing one. Corbin's hand trembled. The USB drive slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the wet granite of his brother's grave. He looked like a man whose skeleton had just been pulverized. You're lying, he whispered, staring at the drive. The unredacted files are at the Pentagon. You can submit a FOIA request, Gideon said coldly. You were played Blackwood. The foreign intelligence asset used your brother, and then they used your grief to turn you into a weapon against the Vances. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Corbin looked toward the gates. Who called the cops, Lorelei? I said softly. She realized you were compromised. She sold you out to the feds to buy herself immunity. Corbin stood frozen. The realization that he had wasted 17 years of his life becoming a monster for a ghost that never existed washed over him. He looked down at his brother's grave. 17 years, he whispered to the wind. I hated the wrong people. He turned and began walking slowly down the hill, straight toward the flashing red and blue lights of the Miami-Dade police cruisers pulling up to the gates. Corbin, I called out. Where are you going? He didn't look back. To pay my debts. The wind blew the bouquet of white lilies over. I walked up, knelt down, and gently righted them. Gideon walked up beside me, lowering his rifle. He placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. Let's go home, Sarah. 3 days later, in New York. The hostile takeover of Thorn Development Group reached its final stage. Vance Holdings officially acquired Harrison Thorne's controlling shares at a 20% discount. At the signing table, Harrison looked like a corpse. His hair was entirely white. Eleanor stood behind him, her arrogance completely annihilated, staring blankly at the mahogany table. Thaddeus didn't attend. He had packed his bags and left New York for a private contracting gig in the Middle East. Before he boarded his flight, he sent me a massive, sprawling text message. I deleted it without reading the first line. Lorelei Mercer was apprehended trying to cross the border into Montreal. According to Caldwell, she had $20, 0 inches cash, and a forged passport. The feds she had tried to sell Corbin out to were actually foreign intelligence contacts. She was facing federal espionage and extortion charges. She would never see the outside of a cell again. Corbin Blackwood pled guilty and offered full cooperation to the FBI, handing over the entire Miami underworld network he had built. Because of his cooperation, he avoided a life sentence. I visited him once at the Federal Detention Center. Through the plexiglass, he looked at me and said, "Thank you." I didn't reply, just gave a brief nod and walked away. Now I stood in my penthouse office at Vance Holdings. Outside, the lights of Manhattan burned bright. Across the avenue, a construction crew was removing the Thorn letters from the skyscraper, replacing them with a sleek minimalist Vance. There was a knock on my door. Caldwell entered holding a leather folio. Miss Serafina, the final SEC filings for the acquisition. Your signature is required. I took the Mont Blanc pen, flipped to the last page, and signed my name with bold, aggressive strokes, Serafina Vance. Caldwell took the folio, walked to the door, and paused. Miss Serafina, the general asked me to remind you. Do not forget to come home for Christmas. I smiled. I won't. After Caldwell left, I leaned back in my leather chair and closed my eyes. A memory surfaced. 5 years ago, the day I dragged my suitcase out of the Greenwich estate, my father had stood in the study doorway. He didn't say goodbye. He only said, if you walk out that door, don't come back. 5 years later, I had come back. Not because I lost, but because I conquered. The daughter of a general doesn't need to take another man's name. She is her own banner.